North Korean troops enter the war, a new chapter in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Tonight, we begin with something that even the most seasoned military analysts described as unprecedented in modern European warfare. North Korean soldiers, thousands of miles from home, fighting and dying on Russian soil against Ukrainian forces. Not as advisors, not as observers, but as active combatants in trenches, under artillery fire, launching assaults across frozen fields in Russia's Kursk region. This is not speculation. This is confirmed reality. Both Moscow and Pyongyang have now officially acknowledged what Western intelligence has been tracking for months. North Korean troops are fighting in this war. And what we are witnessing tonight is not just another tactical shift on the battlefield. This is the internationalization of a conflict that was already testing the limits of global security. This is North Korea, one of the world's most isolated regimes, committing its soldiers to a European war. This is Russia, unable to sustain its invasion with its own forces alone, turning to Pyongyang for manpower. And this is Ukraine, now facing an adversary that spans continents, backed by a coalition of authoritarian powers willing to prop up Moscow's war machine with bodies, bullets, and weapons. The numbers tell part of the story. United States intelligence confirmed that between 10,000 and 12,000 North Korean troops were deployed to Russia's Kursk region by late October. Not to defensive positions far from the front, but to the exact area where Ukrainian forces launched their surprise incursion in August, capturing hundreds of square miles of Russian territory in the most significant foreign attack on Russian soil since World War II. These North Korean soldiers were not there to watch. They were there to fight. And by mid-December, they did exactly that. Ukrainian commanders reported that North Korean units began large-scale assault operations in the third week of December. Not small probing attacks, not reconnaissance missions, but full infantry assaults coordinated with Russian forces aimed at pushing Ukrainian troops out of positions they had held for months. And the cost has been staggering. Within days of entering combat, North Korean forces suffered several hundred casualties, according to United States military officials. By mid-January, Ukraine's commander-in-chief reported that roughly half of the North Korean contingent deployed to Kursk had been killed or wounded. Let that sink in. Roughly half in a matter of weeks. These are not the casualties of a carefully managed military operation. These are the losses of units thrown into brutal, grinding combat with tactics that Ukrainian soldiers on the ground describe as outdated, reckless, and devastatingly costly. Ukrainian forces released footage showing North Korean troops advancing across open fields in large groups, using human wave tactics that military experts say have not been seen in European warfare for decades. Tactics that rely on overwhelming the enemy with numbers, not maneuver or combined arms coordination. Tactics that result in catastrophic losses when facing an entrenched, experienced opponent equipped with drones, artillery, and precision weapons. One Ukrainian Special Forces unit described holding off a North Korean assault for 8 hours, killing 21 and wounding 40 before finally withdrawing under pressure. The footage they released shows close-quarters combat with only meters separating the two sides. It shows North Korean soldiers pressing forward even as their comrades fell around them. It shows the kind of fighting that leaves no room for hesitation, no margin for error, and no mercy for those caught in the open. And here is what makes this moment so consequential. These are not Russian conscripts pulled from distant regions and given minimal training. According to Western intelligence assessments, the majority of North Korean troops deployed to Kursk come from the Storm Corps, an elite unit within North Korea's military. These are soldiers who were supposed to be among Pyongyang's best, trained, disciplined, motivated. And yet, when they met Ukrainian forces in combat, they suffered losses at a rate that shocked even those tracking the war closely. Why? Because modern warfare is not what North Korea has prepared its military to fight. Estonian defense officials pointed out that North Korean soldiers are trained primarily for mountainous terrain, for conflicts on the Korean peninsula, for a war that looks nothing like the flat, muddy expanses of Kursk. They have no experience with the kind of drone-saturated battlefield that defines this conflict. They have no familiarity with the electronic warfare systems that disrupt communications and navigation. They have no understanding of how Ukrainian forces use small, mobile units equipped with first-person view drones to devastate assault columns before they even reach Ukrainian lines. And the results speak for themselves. By late January, Ukrainian special forces reported that North Korean troops had not been seen in their sector for roughly 3 weeks. United States officials told the New York Times that North Korean forces had been pulled off the front lines after suffering heavy casualties. A Ukrainian military intelligence source confirmed that the withdrawal was a standard rotation due to massive losses. This was not a tactical redeployment. This was units being pulled back because they had been decimated. But the story of North Korean involvement in this war goes far beyond the battlefield. This is about geopolitics. This is about alliances. This is about what happens when authoritarian regimes decide that supporting each other's wars is in their mutual interest. Because North Korea did not send troops to Russia out of solidarity or ideology alone. Pyongyang made a calculated decision. In exchange for soldiers, North Korea is receiving access to Russian satellite technology, advanced weapon systems, foreign currency to fund its nuclear and missile programs, and battlefield experience that its military has not had in decades. Russia, meanwhile, gets what it desperately needs: manpower. Because despite Vladimir Putin's claims that over 1,000 volunteers are signing military contracts every day, the reality is that Russia's army is struggling to sustain the pace of operations across a front line that stretches hundreds of miles. Mobilizing more Russians is politically risky. Relying on poorly trained conscripts has proven costly, but bringing in North Korean troops allows Moscow to reinforce critical sectors without further straining its domestic population. And Kursk matters. It matters because Ukrainian forces holding territory inside Russia complicates Putin's narrative that his military is winning. It matters because every day that Ukraine controls even a portion of Kursk, it demonstrates that Russian defenses can be breached. It matters because Kyiv sees those positions as leverage, as bargaining chips for any future negotiations. And it matters because Moscow has committed tens of thousands of troops, including these North Korean units, to retaking that territory before any diplomatic process begins. The presence of North Korean troops also signals something broader. This war is no longer just between Russia and Ukraine. Iran has supplied drones that Russia uses to attack Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. China has provided dual-use technology that sustains Russia's defense industry. North Korea has sent millions of artillery shells, missile systems, and now soldiers. This is a coalition of authoritarian powers working together to enable Moscow's invasion. And that coalition is reshaping the strategic calculations of every NATO member, every European capital, and every policymaker in Washington. Because if North Korea is willing to send 12,000 troops now, what stops them from sending more? South Korean intelligence has suggested that as many as 50,000 North Korean workers could be deployed to Russia in the coming years, and Ukrainian officials have warned that Pyongyang may send additional military reinforcements, including artillery units. The concern is not just about numbers. The concern is about precedent. If authoritarian regimes can openly support each other's wars with troops, weapons, and resources, then the international system that has governed conflict since World War II is fundamentally changing. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte described North Korea's involvement as a significant escalation, warning that the cooperation between Russia and North Korea endangers security in both the Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned of the possible internationalization of the war. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, during a visit to Kyiv, emphasized that North Korea's military assistance to Russia was significantly exacerbating the situation, while Putin continued to pursue a war of attrition designed to demoralize the Ukrainian population. And that brings us to where we are tonight. As of early December, the situation in Kursk remains contested. Russian and North Korean forces have recaptured roughly half of the territory Ukraine seized in August, but Ukrainian troops continue to hold key positions. The fighting has intensified as winter sets in, with both sides seeking to consolidate control before any potential ceasefire negotiations. The terrain is brutal, the weather is unforgiving, and the human cost continues to climb. For Ukraine, the presence of North Korean troops is both a challenge and a propaganda victory. A challenge because it adds thousands of soldiers to an already numerically superior Russian force. A propaganda victory because it underscores the desperation of Moscow's position. If Russia's military was as strong as Putin claims, if its reserves were as deep, If its mobilization was as effective, then why would the Kremlin need soldiers from North Korea? Why would Putin turn to one of the world's most isolated regimes for manpower? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has repeatedly highlighted this point, arguing that North Korea's involvement demonstrates that Russia cannot sustain this war on its own. And he is using that argument to press Western allies for more support, more weapons, more long-range systems that can strike deeper into Russian territory. Because if the war is becoming internationalized with North Korean troops, Iranian drones, and Chinese technology supporting Russia, then Ukraine's supporters need to respond with equivalent resolve. And that is exactly what happened in late November. After months of restrictions, the United States lifted limitations on Ukraine's use of long-range ATACMS missiles, allowing Ukrainian forces to strike targets inside Russia. The United Kingdom followed with approval for Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Ukraine deployed these systems almost immediately, striking ammunition depots, command centers, and logistics hubs in Russian territory, including in Kursk. Moscow responded with fury. Putin warned that the use of Western weapons against targets inside Russia introduced elements of a global nature to the conflict. He revised Russia's nuclear doctrine, lowering the threshold for deploying nuclear weapons in response to conventional threats. But here is the reality. Despite the nuclear rhetoric, despite the warnings, despite the threats, the battlefield dynamics have not fundamentally shifted. Russian and North Korean forces continue to grind forward in some areas. Ukrainian forces continue to hold critical positions in others. The war remains a brutal, attritional struggle where neither side has achieved a decisive breakthrough. And both sides are now racing to secure the most favorable positions possible before the incoming Trump administration pushes for negotiations. Because the geopolitical context is shifting, President-elect Donald Trump has repeatedly stated that he wants to end the war quickly, though he has provided few details on how. His comments have created uncertainty in Kyiv, in European capitals, and among Ukraine's military planners. Will the United States continue to provide the level of support that has sustained Ukraine's defense? Will Trump pressure Zelensky to accept territorial concessions? Will he use military aid as leverage to force negotiations? These questions do not have answers yet, but they are shaping decisions on the battlefield right now. For North Korea, this war has become a testing ground, a place where its soldiers can gain combat experience, where its weapons can be evaluated under real conditions, where its military can learn lessons that will inform its own strategic planning for decades. And that should concern not just Ukraine, not just Europe, but every nation in the Indo-Pacific region that worries about North Korea's intentions. Because when those soldiers return home, if they return home, they will bring with them knowledge of modern warfare, of drone tactics, of electronic warfare, of combined arms operations. They will bring experience that North Korea has not had since the Korean War ended over 70 years ago. Tonight, as we watch this war continue to evolve, as we see new actors drawn into the conflict, as we witness the human cost climbing higher, one thing is clear. This is no longer a regional war. This is a conflict that has drawn in powers from across the globe. North Korean soldiers fighting in Russian trenches, Iranian drones striking Ukrainian cities, Chinese technology sustaining Russian factories, Western weapons enabling Ukrainian strikes deep into Russian territory. This is what internationalization looks like. This is what happens when great power competition spills over into open conflict. And the consequences will extend far beyond Ukraine's borders, because the precedents being set here, the alliances being forged, the tactics being tested will shape conflicts for years to come. If authoritarian regimes can successfully support each other's wars without facing crippling consequences, then the barriers to aggression lower. If democracies cannot respond effectively to coalitions of autocracies, then the balance of power shifts. And if this war ends with Russia holding territory it seized through force, backed by an international coalition of authoritarian supporters, then the message to every revisionist power in the world is clear. Aggression works, alliances matter, and the international order is up for grabs. Tonight, North Korean soldiers are in Russian trenches, fighting a war that has nothing to do with the Korean peninsula, dying for objectives that serve Moscow's interests, not Pyongyang's. And their presence there tells us something important about the world we are living in now. The lines between regional conflicts and global confrontations are blurring. The distinctions between allies and proxies are fading. And the war in Ukraine, the war that was supposed to be over quickly, has become a test of whether democracies can outlast the combined efforts of authoritarian powers determined to reshape the international system in their image. For the soldiers on the ground, Ukrainian and North Korean alike, none of this matters in the moment of combat. What matters is survival. What matters is the next trench, the next position, the next assault. But for the rest of us watching from a distance, what matters is understanding that this war is no longer just about Ukraine. It is about the kind of world we will live in when the fighting finally stops. And right now, that world is being decided in the frozen fields of Kursk, where soldiers from opposite sides of the globe are locked in combat, fighting for futures they may never see.